October 9, 1943, England, 8th Air Force Bomber Command. Inside the operations war room, nerve center of the vast organization which was directing daily attacks against target Germany, the commanding general staff stood ready. Like the bombers on nearby fields, they waited for General Fred Anderson's briefing. Time for decision was at hand. Tomorrow's targets were about to be selected. The general relied on a mountain of information from his intelligence and weather experts.
What's the weather prospect today, Major?
It looks like most of Germany will be pretty good, sir. But we have a warm front approaching from down here, which we do not expect to affect the bases until late in the evening.
How's the weather at Anklam?
At Anklam, sir, we expect 2 to 5 tenths of low cloud and small amounts of middle and high cloud above 18,000 feet. Visibility 6 to 8 miles.
How about Marienburg?
At Marienburg, 2 to 4 tenths of low cloud, little or no middle or high cloud. Visibility 6 to 8 miles.
What will it be at Danzig and Gdynia?
At Danzig and Gdynia, sir, 2 to 5 tenths of low cloud, 2 to 4 tenths of high cloud above 23,000 feet. Visibility in there about 5 miles.
Give me the map of Anklam and the picture of the aircraft factory there.
Yes, sir.
All right, Marienburg, the Focke-Wulf factory.
Yes, sir.
We will attack Marienburg with 2 combat wings, Anklam with 2 combat wings, the shipyards of Danzig with 2 combat wings, and the port facilities at Gdynia with 2 combat wings. That will require a maximum effort.
Maximum effort. This field order was flashed to 150,000 men and 600 aircraft. The mighty 8th Air Force was alerted. Because most of the bombers were going deeper than ever before, the plan was for the task forces to spread and thus divert German fighter defenses. Each route, though aimed at a vital target in the enemy's industrial heart, was carefully plotted to minimize enemy flak and fighter interference. General Bob Williams' 1st Division tackled their part in the mission.
Control point here at 0 hour. Another control point here for the northern unit, 0 plus 40 minutes. The other
From that timing, where will that put our northern force at the time that our southern force hits the IP?
The northern force should be about the east coast of Denmark at that time, sir.
It looks like we're going to catch all the fighters on the southern force, aren't we?
Looks very much that way, sir.
Well, I think we'd better bend that route around so it's headed towards Berlin. If we can pin those German fighters down in Berlin until we can get started home, they'll never catch us.
Meanwhile, General Hodges' 2nd Division got ready.
Danzig, eh? That's fine. How many ships will we have tomorrow?
Well, sir, if you recall, General, on our last mission we had heavy battle damage, and now all those aircraft are repaired yet.
Call up the wing commanders and have them put pressure on the groups to get their maintenance crews to work on these ships tonight and get every possible airplane on the line in the morning.
The planning continued at General Russ Wilson's 3rd Division.
Looks pretty good, sir. We're going to be right over a lake there for a good checkpoint at the turn. We're going in against the sun. The sun will be at our back, sir.
Defenses at the target.
Major Frost, what about the flak defenses?
The upper target, 24 guns. That approach is good. The lower target isn't defended by heavy guns.
No heavy guns whatever at Marienburg.
None, sir.
At combat wing operations, Colonel Kessler's unit plotted airplane takeoffs and assembly.
Field order requires that we provide the 2nd Combat Wing and the 2nd Air Task Force. 89th Group will lead, 81st Group will be high, and the 63rd Group will be low.
That means that Colonel Whitten will lead the combat wing on this mission?
That'll be fine.
Planning was turned into action. Pilots came for the word in the briefing rooms. For some, it was their first mission. Most of us were veterans. Everyone was checked in, no strangers allowed. What went on here could mean life or death in the air later. In a few minutes, we'd learn the nature, locale, and route of today's mission. Who was carrying the ball and what protective tactics we'd use. Once everyone settled down, the briefing started.
The target for today is Ankle. Specifically, you have to destroy the Arado factory.
This group is leading a formation to Mariensburg today. The 880th will be high group and the 764th will be low group. The commanding general of Bomber Command asked us to put out a special effort today, so let's give it to him.
The group COs always had a few words.
Men, the going's going to be rough. You're going to have to pull your necks in there and stay in there and pitch every minute.
Now, gentlemen, this is the type of targets you don't want to have to go back after the second time.
Remember that your biggest enemy is still the single-engine fighter plane. Now, you bombardiers, take your time in going in on your releases.
Now, if you get in any trouble up in this area, remember you can always board a Sweden. Get on it, leave the country. And it's close over there.
Could be rough. I don't think it'll be too bad. And whether it's easy or rough, I'll be sitting out in front, taking the whole works in.
It was quite a show. After 3 hours, we had penetrated deep into Germany. And so far, our tactics had paid off. We were getting through. Our liberators and fortresses followed the timetable of our flight plan in tight formations. As we approached our target, some of the Germans intercepted. But enemy fighters and enemy flak didn't stop us from getting to our objectives. Anklam, Gdynia, Danzig, Marienburg. All work in these German war plants came to a sudden and violent stop.
Attacked at 1142. Marienburg was attacked at 1305. Danzig was attacked at 1307.
On bombing the target, the group leader instantly called the Bomber Command. This command, in turn, promptly informed Ira Aker, the commanding general of the 8th Air Force.
Now, Laker, I have the additional information I reported to you that Anklam was attacked. Well, all primaries were attacked. We received strike messages on all primaries. Danzig at 1307, Marienburg at 1305, and Gdynia at 1311. Yes, sir, I'll advise you as soon as they land.
This was a signal for the 8th Fighter Command to put into action their part of the battle plan. At the British bases, more than 150 P-47s began to take off to escort the returning task forces. The Thunderbolts joined up with the bombers north of Holland. Immediately, enemy fighter activity ceased. From now on, it was a milk run.
Back at the bases, 145,000 men sweated out the mission. All over the field, at dispersal areas, the control tower, the Red Cross, everyone wondered how many would return. Finally, the Marienburg task force was sighted, more than 90 strong. Only 2 bombers missing from this group. The other task forces to Gdynia, Danzig, and Anklam had suffered stiffer enemy pounding. Tactics had called for them to attract enemy fighters away from the main target. It was a calculated risk, but compared to Schweinfurt, losses were cut in half.
one, the bombers set down. At long last, the flyers had returned home. Happy that they got back, our gunners celebrated their victories. Nearly 150 enemy planes destroyed. Although tension eased for the ground crews, the job of the flyers wasn't done.
Before the airmen could rest, they were rushed to interrogation while their impressions and memories were still fresh. Every bit of information was needed for future planning. 3 hours and 21 minutes ago, these men were over Anklam.
What time did you go over the target?
At 11:43 hours. We went in at 12,000
Did you get your bombs on the target?
Yeah. What about enemy fighter opposition?
Well, that's something we figured out.
Really?
Well, let's get some of the details. Where did it begin, Paul?
Well, they first jumped at the 10:30 there just off the Danish coast.
And how long did the attack continue?
They stayed with us to the target and until 13:27. Then at 13:45, we had another group attack and stayed until 14:05. We had a couple more attacks, and the last one was at 15:26, just off the Danish coast coming out.
What type of enemy aircraft did you encounter?
Well, from what I could see from the tail, they threw the book at us. FW-19s, ME-109s, 110s, 210s, Dorniers, even JU-87s and 88s.
I knocked down 2. They were making attacks about 5 o'clock level.
Yeah, I saw them. One of them blew up in the air, and the other one went down in flames.
Were any other guns firing at these planes?
No, sir. These were my babies.
Interrogation over, the cold facts were collected. Strike photos were processed. They revealed the primary target, the Marienburg Focke-Wulf aircraft plant, almost completely destroyed. Only yesterday it had been turning out half of Germany's FW-190 fighters. In fact, the concentration of bomb bursts was so great that General Hap Arnold called it the finest example of precision bombing on record up to this time. Success was the result of scientific planning by an Air Force which knew its business. For 2 more years, the lessons of these maximum effort, long-distance missions were to be applied on an even greater scale over Germany and then Japan, with the combined bomber and escort fighter strength of the growing United States Air Force. (1943) Italy. The Allies had won a toehold on Europe. After bloody Salerno, prime objective was Foggia, an array of Nazi-Italian airfields strategically close to the heart of Germany.
Early the next year, General Spaatz came to Foggia to inspect us. Nate Twining's new outfit, the 15th Air Force. General Aker was taking over command of the Mediterranean theater. The brass met to plan air support, the keystone for Allied armies on the road to Rome.
Winter rains made sunny Italy a sea of mud. Taking 61 days to travel 8 miles, the 5th Army inched its way up the boot. Their order was, push north through the German lines and liberate Rome.
Every day at 0600, the 12th Air Force reported for tactical missions. Fighting the same winter weather, we were handed the grim job of blasting a hole through the Gustav line. We fighter pilots were the sword point of the new Mediterranean Allied Air Forces. Forged in Africa, tempered in Pantelleria, and blooded in Sicily, the 12th was now put to the big test. Italy, no soft underbelly, was defended by at least 24 tough German divisions. We had 11. To balance the opposing forces, we mounted daily strikes to protect our tanks, to clear a path for our infantry. Although weather, terrain, and Nazis had finally stopped our armies, they never stopped us. There was no mud in the sky. power and Allied ground power had been welded into an effective team to defeat the enemy's greater forces. Our plan called for steady ground pressure to be synchronized with strong airstrikes. American airmen were taking off to buzz the Appian Way, the ancient highway trod by Caesar's triumphant legions of old. It was our job to open the rugged road to Rome. Blocking the way were minefields, occupied villages, protected by Nazi airdromes and Nazi tanks.
Support wasn't easy. On the mainland, the enemy had all his resources at hand. Here was a network of rails and roads that had to be cut before our own troops, stymied on the narrow mountainous peninsula, could move. Even army mules had difficulty climbing Italy's rocky backbone. Allied forces, which now included some Italians, measured our advances in mountaintops instead of miles. San Pietro, like dozens of other German-held towns, was caught in a tight net of artillery fire. At times, our men felt they were on the long end of a forgotten front. But in spite of terrain, weather, and dug-in Nazis, the Fifth Army kept up the pressure. From village to village, from mountain to mountain, it was the same bitter action. Attacks and advances. They approached Cassino, gateway to Rome. This was one of those bitter moments born by war. High atop Monastery Hill in the Abbey of Monte Cassino, the godless Nazis had installed an observation post, and from there followed the movements of Allied soldiers below. Relying on the reluctance of the Allies to damage the Abbey, the Germans dominated the Liri Valley. From the sacred citadel itself, they tried to destroy the forces of freedom by directing concentrations of accurate and murderous fire. American Fifth Army artillery hammered back. Stalemated by the enemy's unique position, the road to Rome was blocked.
After weeks of investigation, including personal reconnaissance over Monte Cassino by Generals Acre and Devers, the Allies decided we would bomb and shell the Nazi-held town and abbey. For tactical reasons, Acre was opposed to the bombing. Instead, he favored using air to strangle enemy supply. But Allied leaders felt the continued sacrifice of our own men must stop. Everything else having failed, the Allies ordered air power to neutralize the Nazi observation post.
Worried Germans heard the first wave drone overhead. Like rabbits, the enemy darted into surrounding caves and tunnels carved into solid rock. Long prepared, their Gustav line pivoted on fortified Cassino, the town as well as the abbey, which the Germans had made a military target. but the enemy survived the bombing. Fanatic, they still had the will to fight. Up from their tunnels, their bunkers, up into the ruins, their tough paratroopers quickly regrouped. In minutes, they re-established their strong points. The Germans were back in business. As well as Nazis blocked the way.
Air leaders finally convinced everyone that the only way we could crack the Gustav line was to choke off the enemy's flow of supplies south of Rome. The operation was aptly named Strangle. In March, those of us flying for the 12th and 15th Air Forces began to deliver a series of blows against rail yards, tracks, trains, and bridges, especially bridges. In Italy, there were more than 40,000 bridges. Sanctuary, Operation Strangle was successful from the start. We hunted enemy trains and cut their lines in more than 100 places. We hunted trucks and ships. We strangled enemy supply. On May 11th, we opened a new air and ground drive, a big one. We had the enemy on the run. 3 days later, our 5th Army cracked the Gustav line. It had taken 7 weeks to cut his main arteries and let enemy supply bleed to death. Mobility, the heart of German ground strength, was stymied. All his bridges were falling down. In the words of General Mark Clark, with the splendid effort of our Air Force, we put the enemy on the road.
Allied forces had triumphed at a price. Part of it, 9,000 airmen. But the road to Rome was open at last. There were cheers from grateful Romans for the weary men who had exploded through the tight enemy ring at Anzio's bloody beachhead. Now, after 9 months of brutal war, half of once Nazi-dominated Italy was free, and the Eternal City opened its arms. Out of Cassino and Operation Strangle came new lessons in the application of air power. In the forthcoming prelude to the Normandy invasion, you will see these hard-won lessons and tactics sharpened by the now campaign-wise United States Air Force. January 1944, Germany. Sprawling Nazi factories, fattened by the wealth of conquest and methodically mobilized, produced weapons for Hitler's war machine. After surviving the intensive bombing of 43, their assembly lines doubled production. With painstaking German efficiency, the Luftwaffe grew alarmingly stronger. By February, destruction of the mounting Nazi manufacture became urgent because their production was rising to the goal of a plane every 15 minutes. 12 of these factories in Germany and Poland were called point-blank targets and were given top priority. Hitler had looted the manpower and machinery of nearly a dozen European countries. Hermann Goering, his time running out, spawned reinforcements and new weapons. Thus, the Luftwaffe had become a massive shield for Fortress Europe. At the same time, steel centers like Dusseldorf and Essen forged mountains of bombs and shells. A key to this production was the transport system. All the supply lines, including canals, were full. The enemy war machine rolled on after a winter during which weather had prevented large-scale Allied air attacks.
On 19 February, weather cleared. Now we started the long-planned attack against the Luftwaffe to win control of the skies over Europe, no matter what the cost. This was to pave the way for invasion. General Eisenhower and his air officers, General Spaatz and Kepner, watched our joint effort. Most of us came from Doolittle's 8th Air Force and Bill Kepner's Fighter Command. The stiffest resistance was expected. To protect 1,000 bombers, we were sending along 1,000 fighters. We were going to destroy the Luftwaffe from the bottom up. Nazi factories, Nazi airdromes, and Nazi planes in the sky. Most of General Pete Quesada's 9th Air Force fighter boys had come from units of the 8th. The battle-wise general had helped drive the Luftwaffe out of Africa. Now Quesada was getting us ready for a series of operations which free people will always remember as the Big Week. Sunday morning, 20 February. We prepared for the heaviest assault in the history of the American Strategic Air Forces up to that time. Doubtful weather and a stronger Luftwaffe made this a big gamble. Some expected possible losses up to 200 bombers and crews. This was the prelude to invasion. Generals Brereton, Spaatz, and Vandenberg hurried to join the show.
American heavy bombers from Britain and the Mediterranean and all the RAF could muster, the equivalent of 5 air forces, were about to hit the Nazis for 6 consecutive days and nights. In the biggest air blitz of the war, the Allies hoped to finally win air superiority over the Luftwaffe. The liberation of Europe was at stake. Now, for the first time, the AAF had the strength to mount a saturation offensive. Bombers went to attack airfields and rocket launching sites to pull enemy strength away from the war factories, our main objective. At fighter bases, all fighter command elements were raising the curtain for the prelude to invasion. These takeoff signals marked a change in the basic use of all fighters. Until now, they had only escorted the bombers. This was expanded. Today's orders were, pursue and destroy the enemy. Success of the Allied offensive depended on these escort fighters.
Our bombers plowed into enemy air, although we knew they had us spotted. We tried to make our main effort appear as a two-pronged drive on Berlin. Ignoring the flak, we kept in close formation for maximum self-protection as our thunderbolts caught up.
Forewarned, the enemy massed his fighters. They were as determined to stop us as we were to destroy them. Control of the sky, German sky, was the prize. The Mustangs dropped their wing tanks and plunged into the fight. Leading was an Ohio boy, Captain Don Gentili. Another hot rod, Colonel Francis Kabreski from Pennsylvania, joined the fight. In the same outfit was Indiana's Major Walker McHuron.
Yes, we bomber boys were in good hands. But enemy flak explosions were heavy, accurate, and intense. The Germans closed in. Then came a fresh formation of Mustangs, some of Colonel Blakesley's bachelors. They came down from almost invisible heights to engage the enemy. In Belgium, France, and Holland, our B-26 Marauders evaded flak and unloaded over enemy aerodromes. The brass hoped the weight of these bombs would force the Nazis to move their airfields inland. The plan, guided by General Sammy Anderson's boys, was succeeding. Over Germany, it was the same thing. These first 5 days changed the history of the air war, but it didn't end here. By March, we hit Berlin for the first time. The weight of our attacks increased and held down enemy plane production. As the bombs fell, we pressed our advantage, barreling in to force the Luftwaffe into combat. fighters, without let-up, went after anything that could hurt us. This was no longer a prelude to invasion. This was invasion.
point-blank offensive was the culmination of the strategic air war that airmen had long advocated. The strong shield of Hitler's fortress, the Luftwaffe, had been swept away. As General Eisenhower proudly said, "The air did everything we asked. They cleared the way for invasion." The Allies had attained freedom of the air with the combined long-range strategic bombing and tactical operations of the United States Air Force. March 1944, Italy. 7 months after surrendering to the Allies, Italian airfields resounded with growing American air might. From rebuilt Axis bases, the Allies were able to attack Nazi targets beyond the working range of bombers based in England. Out of the many sky battles, Allied air forces had gradually achieved air superiority. Now, theater air commanders, Generals Spaatz and Acre, arrived at Foggia to plan new strategy with General Nathan Twining, the 15th Air Force CG. Spaatz and Acre were handing Twining the biggest job his bombers had ever undertaken. The 15th Air Force soon got the news. They had been ordered to fly through Hitler's back door and destroy his oil industry. General Twining and his staff took on the job.
Gentlemen, we have just received a new directive establishing target priorities for the bomber offensive of the 15th Air Force. The decision has been announced. We will destroy oil refineries and synthetic oil plants. Now, Colonel Young, what does our intelligence show us in regard to these targets within our area?
More than 50% of the refineries and synthetic plants producing gasoline for the Axis are within range of the 15th Air Force. Between 25 and 30% of the total Axis production of gasoline is represented by the 10 large refineries around Ploesti. While these refineries were seriously damaged in the attack last August by the task force operating from Egypt, recent photo reconnaissance reveals that, with one exception, all refineries are currently operating at full capacity.
General Hubert Kahn, it's a big job we've got ahead. The knockout of Ploesti means the German will be deprived of 1/3 of his oil resources.
We bomber boys who moved up from Africa started the Ploesti air siege. On the morning of April 5th, 94, B-17 swung into formation. Close by were 136 B-24s. We were strong. We expected the enemy's coastal radar network in Albania and Yugoslavia to spot us as we made our approach over the Adriatic Sea. Although it was still early in our 600-mile run to target, we got into flak suits. They're a kind of insurance. Climbing to altitude, we skimmed the Yugoslav mountains. Mighty peaceful. Peaceful until they bristled with flak guns. We were soon to find out the hard way that Ploesti had become the third best defended spot on the continent. This was a high-altitude mission, 21 to 24,000 feet. As we neared the target, we edged into tighter formations. Each had top cover. We all remembered a 1943 Ploesti mission with 177 liberators in which we lost 54 planes. Would this be like last year's mission? This one might be worse. 250 enemy fighters, outnumbering ours 3 to 1, attacked. Fighters almost had enough. By the time we crossed the Sofia-Belgrade line, our lightnings moved in for the knockout punch. Then we ran into flak. 256 heavy guns filled the sky with black, deadly mushrooms. Intense flak, the enemy had added smoke. We could almost smell the nauseating acid fog. 2,000 smoke pots effectively covered Ploesti. Accurate visual bombing was impossible.
At headquarters, they knew something had to be done. After many missions, the target was still effectively protected. On 10 June, operations decided on a new tactic.
We're going to dive bomb Bomaro Americano tomorrow using P-38.
For 4 hours, 1,200 miles, we buzzed the Balkans. The smoke screen had to be licked. We climbed to bombing altitude, and some of us dumped our wing tanks as we got close to the enemy. After hitting the refineries, we attacked German fighter units on the ground. Our P-38s got through the smoke. The mission was successful. We had destroyed 29 enemy planes and had damaged 3 refineries.
But the job wasn't done. Operations increased. Servicing went around the clock. The plan called for the bombers to be on target during the morning hours and stop Ploesti's working day. Now they prepared for 600 plane missions. They tried new electronic devices for blind bombing. Everyone hoped the sheer concentrated weight of tonnage would crack German and Romanian defenses. Ploesti sort of got under everyone's skin. After hitting it from the air, the flyers rehashed it on the ground. The men ate it, slept it, cursed it, especially the flak and smoke. The 4-month campaign since April had cost 1,900 men, the crews of 189 bombers and 41 fighters.
Early in August, General Twining called a meeting of our group commanders.
I've called you in today to discuss future air operations against Ploesti oil refinery. This strategical air force, during the next 3 days, will attack continuously, night and day, with maximum effort against all refineries in the area.
We got over Ploesti all right, but the enemy gave us a warm welcome. They rammed up more than 45,000 rounds of flak. That didn't stop us. During 3 days of smoky air siege, we lost 30 more planes, 23 to flak. But now we had over 100 Mustangs as escorts. The enemy jabbed and our 51 swooped into the battle. Hit hard, enemy fighter strength fell apart. Displaying courage far beyond the call of duty, our boys drove the enemy into the ground. Flak kept our bomber crews on their toes. We waded through it all the way to the target. The full weight of our attack fell on Ploesti. That did it.
The steady pounding whittled away 90% of Romanian oil production. The global and greedy designs of an Axis dictator were consumed in a blazing, oily Ploesti. This was the crowning climax to our air siege. In only 5 months, this had become the graveyard for 1/3 of Hitler's oil. Oil, a pre-war weak point in the Nazi military supply system, became a bottleneck under repeated Allied blows. The bombs had crushed gasoline-producing, storage, and shipping centers. Vainly, Germany's 350,000 slave workers tried to repair the damage. But now, all the refineries in the rich Ploesti cluster were damaged or knocked out.
We hurt them, but they hurt us too. The Ploesti campaign had cost us 270 heavy bombers, 49 fighters and their crews. Each plane and each man helped to shorten the war. As we hit the donut line, we were still flying the mission, and we wondered about our missing air crews. How many would come back? The answer came sooner than we had expected. 12 days after the last bombing of Ploesti, we got a real thrill. An airlift of 56 transport-converted B-17s were bringing back our buddies who had been forced down. Romania had surrendered to the Russians. In just 3 days, more than 1,100 returned as part of Operation Reunion. This was the first mass prisoners of war liberation. Of the first 600, only 10 were stretcher cases. All in all, considering what they'd been through, they were a light-hearted bunch. It was good to be back. Yes, it was a day to remember, that day at Foggia Airport. These were the first, and General Twining made it plain how glad he was to have his men back. He had planned something special. From his Coral Sea experience, he remembered what privation meant. First, he gave his men medical care and food. Then, Godspeed on their next mission. Their new checkpoint was the Statue of Liberty. Their target was home.
The 15th Air Force, by burning Ploesti off the target list, did more than merely destroy enemy oil production. They brought eventual disaster at compounded interest. The German war machine was stalled for lack of fuel. Later chapters will show Allied air power accurately blasting the vitals of the Axis with the hard-won bombing experience of the United States Air Force.